All right, this may do it. Thank you guys for your patience. Type into the chat if you can see me. If you can, thank you. Yay, it's working. Okay. Oh, technology. All right. I think we're good to go. Thank you so much for standing by. I figured it out and they're always changing it. But today, let me just, first of all, hi. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Mary at Insight Fine Art Studio. Today, I'm going to be continuing the still life painting that we started last week. It's an oil painting that I'll be doing in 2 hours total. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to type them into the chat and I'll check a few times throughout and I'll try to direct my comments toward your questions and hopefully I'll answer some along the way. I'm also absolutely happy to, take longer requests. If you have any requests for things you'd like to see demonstrated here at the studio, any questions generally about where to get started as a painter, I would love to make these Wednesday sessions and other videos kind of focused on what people are looking to learn. So I'm happy if you share any thoughts or comments in the chat. All right, let's get started. Okay, so the palette today and always, and I think I probably said this about 5 times today already in my classes this morning. We talked about starting this oil painting back up using a very thin, kind of washy consistency of our paint. I'm going to get a little bit of clean turp, and you can see in this little turp jar here, everything at the top is really clean because it is very settled. I'm going to be very, very careful not to unsettle that turp at all and stir up any, sediment with the paint. And I'm just grabbing a little oil to mix in, taking big giant steps. All right, so I like to start out with this very thin consistency of paint because I can work into this. And we want to be really mindful of the paint consistency because you don't want to run out of room, as it were, right? You don't want to paint too, thick with the paint starting out. So that way you have a little bit more you can get into in today's session. You can kind of time it that way, right? So we start with thin paint. Here in this little container, I have a mixture of linseed oil and Gamsol odorless mineral spirits. And I like to add that to a squirt bottle because it keeps it really clean. You don't have to worry about dipping your brush in. And on my palette, I'm mixing a very sort of generic dark color. Ultramarine blue. And it is a little bit of, I think, quinacridone magenta and a little burnt umber. Okay. And after all that, I'm ready to go. So here we go. Drawing into the painting, I'm always thinking about, sort of what I can correct at this stage. How far can I take this drawing mixture? And I always want to emphasize areas with more contrast that I know I really want to draw forth and organize a little bit more from this chaotic brushwork that I have going on here. And I'm using this really small kind of pointy brush, but not for long. And it's not going to be, something that I use really opaque. I'm not really applying much. I'm just kind of giving it a light dusting with a darker color. And when we talk about the consistency, there are so many considerations that you sort of have to think about because you want the paint to be, let me talk to you about this. You want the paint to be thin enough where, you can see through it. You're not covering everything. But you also need that paint to be fluid enough so that you can actually move your brush and things come off of it, right? And yet you don't want the paint to be very drippy so that you're just creating this kind of sloppy, wet surface that you really can't paint into for a while. So when I tell you how much I struggled with consistency of paint, and I think kind of needlessly, because I think maybe if someone had broken that down for me, or maybe if I had noticed that someone was breaking that down for me, I could have sort of understood a little bit more easily what the process of like working through an oil painting session kind of looks like, right? And what makes it easiest, and what makes it like kind of pay off a little bit more, right? So right now I'm just kind of building that payoff, which is contrast. We're looking out for these areas. And I don't want you to think that I'm over here outlining stuff. I hope it doesn't look like that. If it does feel a little too outlined, don't worry, I'm going to try my very best and we're going to break that up later because I certainly don't want that. But what I am doing is trying to sharpen some areas and just give a few little darker accents here and there, a little more information. And again, this is such little amount of paint. It does not require a whole lot of material to get this information on the canvas very quickly, and I can still work into this, which is the most important thing. Because I think I would really like overdo it on the early layers of my paintings as I was working on them, not understanding that I kind of had to leave room for development through that session. Probably similar things hold true for other materials. So hopefully you can see this sort of sharpening into view a little bit. I'm focusing on the still life setup, which it's a really kind of chaotic, busy setup. And so what I tend to do is squint my eyes and I look for the dark shapes. And so there might even be like a little redraw, some negative shape, and kind of take out of that background. And I'm just almost leaving like a little note to myself right now. It's not exactly the color. I'm making a little bit more green. Let's see. And I just added a little sac green and I just added a little viridian green, but I still want to keep it transparent and dark. It's just that I've done a little bit here and now I kind of feel like I can get a bit more specific with the color, and I might change to a slightly more scrubby, wider brush that has a little bit more coverage ability. So we're going to go with 4, a little bit more specific color, and I'm thinking about the little cast shadow shapes in the background. I'm neutralizing a couple of different greens together, like sap and viridian. And I mix those together and I'm sort of neutralizing it with some of that mixture that I had from earlier, which was sort of like purple and brown, but not by much. So it's not super muddy. It's a pretty, I really like this color. I think it's gonna be good. There's a lot of color in it though. But essentially it's a really strong dark green, and that's an interesting color. I don't want to overdo that. That could be a very useful color. So we're just going to reserve that idea for a bit later. All right. And now I'm starting to mix a little bit an opaque color. And why am I doing that? Let me think about this. Am I done with this transparent dark stuff? Sometimes I just do things and I really have to think about why I'm doing them consciously to tell you about them. And then I start to question them. So let's think about this. All right. Logically, I should probably keep going, but I'm going to keep going. There's still more I can do here before I go opaque. But the impulse is strong, people. And I do think there's something to that. Like you should follow your instincts or at least sort of examine, like, why am I thinking I want to do that? You know, people often change things in their references and they'll say, oh, that was unintentional. That was a mistake. It should have been this way. But it's almost always, the kind of thing where it's actually much better that they just kind of followed that instinct. I don't know, just something to think about. If you are instinctively sort of going towards doing a certain thing in the painting, or all of a sudden you find yourself kind of mixing a certain color, maybe think about if that's a good idea. It might be a very good idea. I want to see into that shadow a little bit. Okay. So that is now, I've discovered why I think I was mixing a little bit of white into that color. And I know I went very red, but it was probably just dull it down. And I think what I want to do here is, I want like a little bit of like a reflected light kind of bouncing around in there. And this color is pretty dark, like I said before. So reserving that color, just going just a touch lighter. So if you are just starting out and this is feeling like a lot, think about it this way. Another way to think, to say this is like, we are just going to expand this value range as we go. Okay, so we don't want to start with the full darkest dark all over the place for this whole shadow shape. It should be something that, maybe we go for like a middle of the road kind of thing, the middle way, right? So start with the middle and then expand out of the middle. Okay. I think that's usually seen as kind of the most organized and logical way to paint. Of course, it's not the only way to paint. Now, last week we talked a little bit about how I want to minimize stuff down here, okay? Just to keep that compositional flow the way that I really see it. I want this X shape to be the emphasis here. So I'm just going to put a little bit here and there, just a bit of a shadow color to maybe ground these grapes and move us back through here. And I'm not as concerned with describing what I'm seeing, but making marks that just kind of go the right direction through this chaos without overly explaining it. And by the right direction, I just mean wherever I feel like the viewer should go, wherever this kind of flowy shape, looks good to me. It's really just, instead of thinking like I have to draw this leaf, this pear, this background, thinking about like what shapes, what colors are separating these objects. And then, knowing that you can take plenty of liberties with what you're seeing, you can change whatever you really, want to bring out of the scene, of the setup here. And a little color variation. I'm seeing some yellow, and we talked a little bit about how yellow, last week we were talking about how yellow is sort of the unifying color. I don't know that that was a totally wonderful color that I ended up just putting down, but you know what? I'm going to go with it and I'm going to put more of it. So, all right. And actually, I like it. It's fine. It's enough. And I want this to have like a really, vibrant feel, just things tumbling around, leaves everywhere, colors reflecting. I'm okay with layered marks. I'm okay with, getting this sort of painterly look happening and just trusting it will come together somehow. Now, I was not always this way. And if you are, starting out, this might feel like, a little bit much. So, blocking things in, let's just go back to the goal of this process. It's covering everything and then making adjustments when you see it all covered. I mean, that's really the most simplified way to put it. It's just you want to see everything in there, see it all covered, and, then we'll just kind of think about how those adjustments um, need to go once everything's in. So, how do I focus on temperature? Yeah. So, I mean, I do to a huge degree, but it's more like, I think more in terms of like hue, I want to say, than temperature. So, I'll try to think about that as I mix up the next little round of colors, maybe. Um, for example, like this is a very yellowy green kind of area here. That's a really light driven area where we see that light source is hitting most directly. So that's our kind of highlight. So it's got plenty of yellow in it. And then, of course, we're going to green that up a little bit. So here's a little Viridian. Now, one thing about color matching is that, I'm not really trying to match it exactly, but I am thinking, is this a complement to the area? Is it going to look, does it add to, I shouldn't use the word compliment because I don't mean that kind of compliment, like opposite on the color wheel. I mean like um, something that adds to the area, right? Like we want to think about making variation and not nailing the exact color each and every time, but hold that palette knife up is my point. I'm going a lot more teal with this. This is needing that like really zingy kind of green color, and I'm holding it up again to my painting, and now we're in the ballpark. And I happen to have, this is like probably a little cooler because it's got some more blue in it. It's more minty, and that's going to fit more in the background. So while I was going for this color here, I ended up with this color here, and I'm determining right now if I want to just use it up here or keep mixing, because either one is fine. Sometimes it's more efficient. I'll probably just use it. Yeah, I think it's useful. Let's go for it. New brush, lots of scooping of the paint. I don't know if you saw that closely enough. I hope so. I was really just like filling this brush up with paint. And I'm still going to scrub that over. So again, going back to that consistency. Consistency really stems from the pressure that you're putting on your brush as you're painting, just as much as it does like how much liquid is in the paint to give it flow. So you can have, so many variables at play with the way that you're mixing the color, the way that you're applying the color, the way that you're loading the brush. And they're pretty influential to how the painting ends up looking. So, it's really a fun thing to play around with. And I'm just, again, emphasizing those kind of X-shape compositional lines. Now I'm sort of throwing like the same background color in as almost a leaf color in front of the reddish background area. That looks pretty cool. Break that up a little bit. A little random here and there. Cute. Cute. It was a cute little mark, wasn't it? All right. I don't know. Sometimes I do think like marks have personality. If you listen to me talk long enough, I am bound to surprise you with some weird things that I think about painting. All right. So the block-in process. Certainly a weird one, this one that I'm doing. It's not my typical kind of way that I establish these early layers. This is a lot more brushy, but I'm just kind of going with it. This is just sort of what showed up today and last week. And, I think this is kind of a style of painting that I would say, comes fairly natural to me, and also one that like I think, people talk about they want to paint loosely. And I think that this is something that, what's hard about it is what I struggle with too. It's just not overworking it and not over explaining it, and really just trusting that your marks will eventually come together and create the atmosphere and the objects and the kind of motion and movement that you're initially envisioning when you look at it, because it is like so hard when it doesn't look like anything. You sort of have to just really let go and trust that it's going to eventually come together. Anyways, those are things that I have struggled with. And I got to say, sometimes they do come together and sometimes they don't. And that's okay. So don't, feel like every painting has to be a winner to be useful and like progress your ideas in some way. And the other thing is, even if it doesn't progress your ideas and you weren't like sure about how that went, just do another one. Don't worry about it. So that's my thought of the day. Deep thought of the day. All right, the peach. Let's get into it. Right. That color is already, I really like it. Wow. It's kind of so different on the palette versus when I hold it up. And honestly, sometimes when that happens, I think that's a good sign. It means you've created like a little world of color in your painting that sort of like alters reality or something, Like if things look, color is very relative and it's going to look different whatever you put it next to. So being able to sort of change what a color looks like when it enters the world of your painting, I think is kind of cool. And another little issue I've sort of been chipping away at for a really long time, I think. So, all right. So I really like this reddish color. I want to transition this into the other objects and if possible, even a little bit into this background color. I don't see why not. It's virtually the same. So let's go for that. And that means I'm going to have to make some decisions about our, what are they like? What did we decide? The clementines, yeah. About where those are, about where leaves are. There's a weird drawing thing, which I really don't want to fix. And I don't love where that placement is, but I'll fix that. I think I can fix it if no, that's even more weird. All right. I think I need to make that distant clementine just disappear a little bit more. That's a tricky one. There's always something. There's always some little thing that bugs, like just bugs you. Like not always, but quite frequently I will have one little issue that's like, well, it's a little trickier than the rest, or I wish I had resolved that a bit more intentionally earlier in my drawing. feel like it's a little too high. I think it's a little floaty. Don't really want, oh, I could just make it a lot lower actually. Yeah, I'll probably just do that. I'm just kind of dotting through these really light yellowy marks. I want that to be very broken up, and I don't want to over explain. Again, sometimes it is so much worse and calls so much attention to something that you're sort of not liking if you really focus on, like, I'm going to define it. Here I go. Let me get that defined. That'll fix it. It probably won't. At least in my experience. I don't know. So we're looking at ways that we can kind of just like hint at something back there. Right. I kind of see something. Yeah, that's almost forming a cohesive form. Let's see if we can just amp up that yellow just a little bit. It is 2:30, checking my, I did get started a couple minutes late. That's why I was like, why do I feel like this is not happening for 2:30? But we're going to be okay. Now I have multiple brushes going. We are thinking about adding a little dark green leaf to put behind. There we go. So that just sort of hints at like, okay, there's a something there, and then we'll just bring some leaves in front. And, hopefully that's going to do it. But we'll see. Okay. I really want to put like a nice little cast shadow area under that leaf and start to get a little depth into this grouping here. Little more definition. We can pull out maybe more information just to hint that there's something else happening, maybe another leaf. And that's what I've always been sort of drawn to in painting, is when things are explained but not overly explained. When they're really clear, I've seen, beautiful, beautiful paintings that have such clarity. But I think for me, like at least right now, and kind of always, my interest has been more in like a looser depiction that is not necessarily too concerned with, description of every single thing. I really like that. When it's used more for like abstraction, that's much more interesting to me. And yet, I got to say, I think it's absolutely critical that we learn drawing and painting, and representational, even realistic drawing and painting skills are like totally foundational. And like, I would be absolutely lost having not learned them. I don't think I would be a painter at all. No way. So it all really comes from realism for me. You know what I mean? Like, I think realism really is the basis for all abstraction. Tell me I'm wrong. All right, but don't tell me now, because now I have a really great color on my brush and I'm just going to pop this all over the painting, because when I have a good color that I love, and I just go too far with it. See if I can avoid it. I like that in the shadow area here. I'm going to make a slightly darker version to address that. Why am I not getting into this part of the painting? We don't know. Let's do it now. I have one little technical issue that I see coming up. And what I'm going to do is just take about a 45-second pause to deal with that. If you guys could just stand by for 1 second, I will be right with you. Okay, all good? I hope so. Gotta get a little power for that iPhone camera. Thanks for the standby. All right, back to color. Let's talk about it. So we've got this lovely background, magenta, salmony something. We want to just like do this kind of in one shot. So we're just going to amp up the paint mixture and get a little more volume here. Holding up just kind of my mixture of colors, it appears that I have like exactly the right color, which is always amazing. But I don't really have enough of it, so that's never amazing. That's okay though. We can just use that pile as our reference point, and I don't need to absolutely match it at all. I can a little bit. I can make some variations. That's always a good idea, but I can also tell that if that were a little lighter, it's always my first question. Is it too light or too dark? We're getting there. And if it were just a little bit more yellow, and I'm out of yellow, so let me squeeze that out. This is the India Yellow. If you guys want like a supply list, I'm going to definitely put something new on my website. So let me know if you're interested in oil painting colors or any other supply recommendations, because I've got so many. So we were just going to put a little bit of that India Yellow into that color. Looks really good, and we can just go for it. First of all, I think that's going to be a big improvement right there. That color was just a little too gray. And I like how that, again, X shape is kind of like bringing the magenta color across the painting this way. I just need to quickly decide on the shape of these leaves and what I want that to do in the composition. So let's see if that works. Okay. That might be okay. I think we need just a little indication of like a shadow up there. I'm gonna quickly switch brushes, mix a quick shadow color for that, which is just gonna be a darker purple mixed into that. And we're gonna take that down a level in value. We will be filling these leaves in later, by the way. All right, a little bit of directional kind of quality of movement here wouldn't be a bad thing. Feels like it's getting a little bit static, so let's kind of break that up a little bit. How does that gesture of the, gesture drawing, how does the gesture of that leaf grouping kind of feel? So I'll just use brush strokes to sort of get those directional qualities reestablished, and then hopefully a little bit of color variation, and you can see the brush strokes even more. So sometimes color variation, and one of the things that I often tell students here at the studio is that you have this really beautiful area happening, but we just need to bring more attention to it by adding some contrast there. So the marks are gorgeous, but if no one can see them, then that's kind of where we need to go. We need to like reestablish their visibility. We got to make them more visible. And I think that's kind of what needs to happen here. So, kind of filling some contrasting marks in. Take us a little bit more towards a finish on this area. So, I think like getting kind of brushy, atmospheric backgrounds, it's not something that is actually that easy. People have a hard time kind of making the background fit with the object sometimes. And one of the things that I often will point out is that whenever you have a good color on your brush, jump around and try to use it kind of elsewhere if you can. It really will relate everything so much more closely, and also it sort of creates permission for these like marks of color to exist. The more you put on, the better it looks, because if it's painted all flat and accurate and everything's just explained so carefully, we can't really break it up later. Much easier to kind of start loosely and then work toward a progressively more described and like involved level of finish, right? So we can kind of start with like a very, very loose, colorful blob. And when I go back and add these little darks and these little lights, all of a sudden it might be grapes. Now, this is an area where I really want to be extra careful that I have a loose edge established here, because I don't want to define that lower edge of the grapes too much. So I'm just going to kind of mix up that table green. And let's see if I have a suitable brush to paint it with. Here we go. Suitable meaning I've used it for green already. And so with oil painting, I'm not really cleaning my brush every single time. All right. Also suitable meaning like just the size of the brush is kind of useful. All right, I'm now going to mix that color to be a little bit closer to like what we see on that light side of the table. So it's more yellow and it's lighter, so more white. It's definitely more intense. So I'm going to put in some of that India yellow, which is like the zingiest color. Like the word zingy is like the only word I can really use to describe that color. It's just like so acidic almost. It's great. I love that color so much. All right. I'll grab a little bit of sap on my brush and see if we can't get a tiny bit darker variation. And again, more India yellow to keep that in a similar range. Let's see what that gets us. Like a step lighter. I'm kind of okay with it. I'm going to work my way forward eventually. I just really want to establish this bottom dissolving. Yep, we just want to see that disappear into the painting if possible. And what I'm doing now is just kind of putting my brush on the painting and just flicking across. It's super fun. You should absolutely try it. Can it ruin your entire painting? Absolutely not. I was going to say absolutely, but I guess I change it to not. All right. Get a little bit more paint. Wow, I'm really going through this stuff. But You know, that's what it's for. So here we have India yellow, and I just added a little Viridian green, and that's a really nice combination. Before, I think it might have been a little bit too heavy on the sap green. So we'll go with, yeah, it's nice. I feel like that's drawing out the yellow a little bit more. I'm going to toss a little bit of that into this peach color. Back through here. Really fun. I mean, it can almost go anywhere. You're just putting a little dash of it. But I mean, it's like the sum has to sort of still remain that it's mostly light over there, where that light source is hitting hardest. So, keeping that in mind, we'll just kind of make sure to really lay those marks on very confidently in our lightest, most yellowy color. And then stepping back too is really important, just to make sure that we're kind of seeing the effect. Background color change is often, it's subtle, but if you really compared like what's going on up here to what's going on up here, you don't want it to be exactly the same. It can be a really subtle difference, but it should be some difference because our light source is much closer to that foreground plane. And so we want to make sure to show that. And here we have this other like really wild area that I was a little bit afraid of, but I think it's okay. How is that going to resolve? Maybe we need just looking at shapes, trying to make sure that they're not too repetitive, Again, it just goes back to that feeling of, it's an abstract quality instead of I have to describe these exact, objects and exactly what I'm seeing. You really don't. Use that as a starting point if you're like me, and use whatever else you want as a starting point if you're like you. But I mean, I think that it is a really fun idea to play around with using still life objects as these kind of like starting points for very, very abstract almost compositions. At least that's what I think. All right, let's finish up this pair and then let's finish up this painting. Let's see if we can. I will organize my colors just a little bit over here because that is a decent amount and I might be using that a bit later. And then let's see if we can't get that nice bright light color for the light side of the pear. Cadmium yellow light, a little India yellow. Just those two are just really beautiful, but I bet a little pink. You want to make a cooler one. So I just made a warm version of that color. And then let's see if we can't make just a touch cooler so that they can kind of like play off each other. And that's what I mean about like making things more visible. Sometimes a color that you're working with, you want to sort of split it into maybe warm and cool if that's what you're thinking of, or saturated and slightly desaturated. A little variation can be a really good tool to have as you're sort of putting these final marks over your block in layer. You know, blocking in, sometimes things are more simplified. And for this final layer, you know, maybe you're now kind of expanding on what you've already established here. And I'm just going to use that like turning edge where I see the more intense color. And then I just noticed that this little green over here combined with this yellowy pink is going to do a lot for me if I can use it here, the shadow side of the peach. A little more green. It just feels so much more finished now to me. I just saw that color possibility just kind of pop up, and I just thought I would go for that. And getting, you know, to a point where, like, if you are just naturally gravitating toward, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, maybe it's not out of panic. If it is out of panic, don't panic. Stop doing that. And see what the next logical step is. But if it isn't, and it's just kind of like an instinct, like consider following that. That could be a good idea to just like, you know, use that intuitive sense of what you believe the painting needs, even without consciously thinking it. I think that's the most fun when you're kind of tuned into that and then you're just going for it. A little bit of yellow in here, yellow tying this entire world of color together. And we'll just kind of use that throughout so that everything is kind of mixed and shared, creating a really good sense of like harmony and just this all over pattern. I hope. And I'm mixing like a little quick brush mixed shadow color for some of this area in here. Emphasize that. And then we're going to paint in one more thing to mix with the palette knife. I'll probably go for like another 10 minutes on this because I did start just a few minutes late, and I always like to have exactly the time. There should be a stop clock and a buzzer. All right, so I'm mixing for these bluish, I think, what are they? Foxgloves, maybe? I can't say, but I'm sure someone knows. But I don't get out much. So if you know, please tell me. In any case, I love this color. I love that bluish, silvery, kind of like leafy, but not green. And I feel like I use these in so many paintings just because of that fact. They're just really beautiful colors. So, like I said, it's an abstract painting just in the guise of a still life painting, I think. And I'm just trying to arrange these, concentrating on kind of seeing like where I think they should go without like defining every single thing. Again, I could really get myself into trouble here if I were to do too much defining. Give this a little color change. I see a little more warmth here, which I'm hoping will kind of disguise it a bit more and flatten it back to that background plane. So I'm going to lighten my color. Where am I? Got a little lost on my palette. That's okay. We are lighter. We are a little bit more like magenta. I'm going to share some of that background color in there. Okay. This is really my way of thinking, is like, if I want this to disappear into the background, I have to use background colors. It's pretty basic thinking, I think, right? Now that's too dark. That might be okay. It's subtle, like it's not a huge change. Maybe too subtle. We'll see. And again, not the whole thing. I have to let some things kind of just skip around and disappear, and kind of just let the brush almost turn in your hand. If you're interested in like how, you make these marks, and a lot of people do ask that question. They're like, what brush do you use? How do you, how do I make those marks? Really holding your brush very, very loosely in your hand and just letting it kind of blah, blah, blah through the painting. It makes such beautiful marks. It sort of has like a little, Harry Potter and a wand vibe. I think it's kind of like doing its own thing. It's sort of, think of like allowing gravity to have some effect on the brush. So you're just kind of letting it flop around on the canvas a little bit. Not as controlled as at all. It's nothing like holding a pencil or a pen to write with. That's a very controlled, very precise, very, kind of driven by like the finger dexterity. This is not at all about that. This is definitely more like the arm, it's like a golf swing or something. It's closer to a golf swing than writing with pen or pencil. But I don't know. I don't golf. All right, we got to wrap this up, people. What's the critical? I like it. It's loose. It's messy. I feel like I might do a little bit of touch up on it at some point and put it on my website. Kind of a fun painting. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to paint for just a couple more minutes, and then I will be signing off. And I hope that you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, I'll put the reference too if you want to like see the reference and or make a painting from it. That would be an honor. Honestly, I'd be honored. So let's just see what we can do for the next few minutes. About, what did I say? 5 minutes? I'm just gonna like step back and kind of revisit. I want to finish some paint up here. This feels a little less finished. I want to put a little more variation into it. Maybe get a little, sorry about that. Sense of maybe shadow or depth back here would not be the worst. And I think even darkening just a little bit in here still reinforce that nice compositional shape that I started with, which I'm actually pretty happy, like kind of is maintained. Now this part doesn't feel quite as finished to me. So I feel like I want to rub through here and add a little bit. Yeah, that already feels so much better just to kind of give that some darkness and like sense of like that's the end of that composition. There we go. Honestly, sometimes just finishing the painting all the way to the edges, it just works wonders for it. So probably if I spend any more time on this, like the next couple of days, that might be a place that you'd see me spending some time. Finishing things out to the edges, but you can see how many layers I put on this background and how many times I've sort of revisited that compositional shape. Just keep reestablishing it and reestablishing it. I think sometimes, you know, the most successful paintings are going to be those that are like the most true to your initial vision. So, although that's not always true, sometimes I will let something progress that, you know, maybe I really needed it to kind of go a few different places first before I could kind of tell where I wanted it to be. Case in point, I just had a pretty big painting that I started with like one background color and then completely changed the entire color scheme of the piece. That does not happen that frequently though. And I'm just going to put on a few little dots and marks to like finish that up a bit. Lemon yellow is such a great color to kind of like bring into these highlight colors because I see quite a bit of it. So I hope you guys have had fun. I hope that was an enjoyable session today. If there's anything that you feel might be interesting to see or any questions you have, definitely let me know. All right, last little bit. Oh, speaking of painting all the way to the edges, let's just tear that down. There we go. Don't paint it flat. Don't paint it too evenly. Give it some life. And remember, the old saying is, it is done when it stops getting any better. So thanks for joining, and hopefully you enjoyed. We'll see you